Welcome to Third Space. Third spaces are the places outside of home or work where we gather to share our thoughts and our ideas. I think of a local coffee shop as a third space. And this podcast is called Third Space because I want you to feel like you're just overhearing people talking about matters of great importance. My guests are leading thinkers and doers and innovators. And when they're in third space, they all connect to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging in schools, which right now is a really controversial topic. So definitely want to dive further into that. I want to also just thank Kwame for being willing to come back to Third Space. If you saw the promo advertising our episode, you would have seen that no episode followed. I had tech issues. The episode was lost, and I was truly heartbroken because it felt really meaningful and we got really deep really quickly in our conversations. And I thank you for coming back and would love for you to just share a little bit about yourself and your story.
Well, thank you for having me back, Jen. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with you. And as far as who I am, for those who don't know me, my name is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I am tuning in from Lusaka, Zambia, which is in the southern part of the African continent. Just moved out here 3 months ago, so still getting my feet wet in this new environment. But as far as who I am, first and foremost, I'm a father, I'm a husband, family man, and professionally, I'm an educator. Started my career as a middle school math teacher, did that for about a decade before transitioning into consulting. When I started my firm, Identity Talk Consulting, which is all about three pillars: identity affirming education, anti bias, anti racist education, and finally, culturally responsive teaching. So, those are the three pillars that I cover with all my engagements with different schools globally, educators, and other organizations. And I'm just happy to be here to have another opportunity to talk with you, Jen.
Thank you. And, I wanted to tell you that, so we're recording this in April, the end of April. And the other night I was on a call with the equity committee for AMLE, where we first met in person, though we had followed each other for a while, but we were at AMLE in November and people are still quoting you. So I'm really excited for listeners to hear from you and for us to learn together. So, and what time is it where you are right now?
It's only 3:47 in the afternoon, so it's still daytime.
Okay, so we're 6 hours ahead, so thank you again for adjusting your schedule, that's quite a lot. So we began and I wanna go deeper into when we first met, it was the day after the election, the 2024 election, and we were all in our feelings about it. I can't think of a better way to describe it. I think we ranged from being numb and uncertain to fearful and everything in between. And one of the things you said in many conversations, these weren't your exact words, but what I took away from it was that we have to be strategic and consistent in what we're doing, that we have to really be thinking about what we're doing and not reacting, which I know I fall into. And many other people in the room said that they also became very reactive. And you kept saying, no, we need to be thinking big picture, long range, and really focused in how we support this work. And you work with educators all over the world. So I'm just curious as you think about how we support identity, all identities in schools. Are you noticing trends between different countries, or are there commonalities, or what are you seeing when you think about all the different places that you work?
I think from my purview, you're seeing a little bit of everything. I know in a lot of international schools, particularly those that are being supported by the US government and the Office of Overseas Schools, you're seeing a reduction in funding as it pertains to anything associated with DEIJ initiatives and programs. Also, we want to throw in there special education. So there's been a reduction in funding for that as well because somehow we've merged special education and learning support in with DEIJ. So you have students who are neurodiverse, students who have learning support plans who may not get the services that they need because of this reduction in funding, which then is having an impact on budgets in different international schools that are being supported by the US government. As far as the resistance goes, there was resistance before the new administration came into office. But one thing that you start to realize is a lot of what happens in American politics permeates throughout the rest of the globe. Um, so you have a number of different nations who watch what happens in the States and then they just follow suit. So when you look at a lot of the legislation that's taken place stateside, particularly around DEIJ, particularly around anything that you associate with LGBTQIA plus communities, um, that legislation you are seeing in different forms throughout other countries. So that's what I've noticed within the international school realm and other sectors. And given what has already transpired over the past almost 4 months with this new administration, I can see a lot more activity taking place, which is more of a reason why we have to be strategic, as you mentioned, with how we go about doing things and addressing these issues.
It's well, I'm wondering along those lines, have you noticed this, well, I'll tell you something I've noticed is that schools in the States and other countries where I work, they, for the most part, haven't pulled back on the work. They just want me to talk about it differently or use different words or and in some ways, I'd love to hear your one of the things I love about talking with you is because you will like stretch me in my thinking. So I always welcome that. In some ways, I welcome the idea of thinking about it differently because we know that if you have, let's say we had a diversity night, you're going to get the same 12 people to come who go to everything, who are probably already doing a lot of work. And so I have found that with any sort of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, we have to put it into an access point for other people. So if it's about how do you help your child talk across differences, that's the topic, even though it is very much about what do we mean by differences and how do we find commonality. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that as well, where schools are saying and organizations are saying you can't use these letters. So
So yeah, you're definitely seeing a number of schools who say that they want to remain committed to doing this work. I've definitely seen that in the realm, but it's just a matter of figuring out what that looks like in this new administration, this new era, right? Where there's a lot of censorship around language and just the lexicon. Um, that's associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you do see that happening. You do see schools and educators saying we want to change our curriculum to make it more equitable and more inclusive of all student identities. We want to look at our policies to see where we can make changes that will provide more access for our marginalized learners. So there's still a commitment to it, but there is a warranted level of fear when it comes to that. So you have a subgroup of schools and teachers who are saying to themselves, I want to do this work. I just don't know how we can do it and what that permutation will look like in this new era. Just to give an example, I'm currently doing a book club for Learn to Relearn, virtual book club, because there are so many different teachers across the globe who want to have the conversations and they want to build with other educators globally, um, to come up with solutions to a lot of the same issues that they're having, but they can't do it within their own school community. So now they're looking for a virtual community to serve as refuge, but also a space where they can speak boldly and bravely about the things that they want to see change in their respective communities. So that's one way that you have different teachers and schools continuing to engage with the work, but also maintain the partnerships with organizations that are not impacted federally by by the legislation that's been put out there. So you have some organizations that are independently funded, so they can still do what they want to do and say all the words that the government doesn't want you to say. And then there's some who, even though they are independently funded as an entity, they're not able to get certain contracts, or they're not able, or sometimes the contracts that they have existing end up being either rescinded or terminated on the spot. But I definitely believe that you have a number of schools, enough schools and educators who genuinely believe in the spirit of the work, and it's more of a question of how to go about doing it in this new time period that we're in.
I know, again, I'm lamenting missing our previous episode because we in that space talked about some of our predictions or things that we heard might be coming up. And one of them was that there were words that we weren't going to be able to use anymore or that we're not going to be able to reference. And even in that moment, some of the words that are on the list, I never would have imagined. I would not have imagined that women would be a word that we couldn't use, or mental health, or all these other things. And just as a side but very important note, you mentioned Learning to Relearn. That's Kwame's book. I will put the link in the session notes, holding it up right now. So if you're watching on video, please check it out. It's a highly, highly acclaimed book that has been described as user friendly and deep thinking. That's a hard balance to create in a book. And so I highly recommend it. All of this leads me to our what we had wanted to focus on was really thinking about how do you claim joy in these times, and how do you hold on to a positive attitude, because if we don't have that, if we aren't able to do that, then we can get crushed by everything else. And all I can think of, I work in a school every day, and all I can think of is how do I show up for my students in a positive, hopeful way when the messages that the adults in their lives are getting, and they are getting as well, is that there shouldn't be hope and joy for who you are as a person. And I'd love to just think about, when we were having our pre-session call, we're just kind of brainstorming about how you find joy and courage in resistance. And love to hear some of your thoughts about that. How do you hold on to a sense of hopefulness or joy or courage, or do you ever get down about it? And what do you do? Lots of questions.
I mean, Jen, we're human, so we do have emotions that take us to a place where we don't want to go, for sure. But the thing that allows me to to stay centered is just the fact that I got a family, I have a wife, I got two little boys, who give me joy every day. So leaning on to the fact that I still gotta be a father, and I still need to be a presence for them. They can't see the negativity. They can't absorb that from me. So it's my responsibility to ensure that even in the midst of the chaos that's taking place, I have to provide a space where they can see that joy is always going to be a possibility for them in their lives. So that's one. Also, being able to do book talks with different communities who have been digging into Learn to Relearn, that always gives me joy. Having conversations with like minded, aligned individuals like yourself who are just as passionate about identity affirming work, that's something that will always give me joy. And then just knowing that we do have youth, we do have young people who have their eyes open to what's happening and they're asking the right questions. They're interrogating the right elected officials who are perpetuating the inequities and the injustices that are taking place. So seeing that you have a heightened level of civic engagement from the younger generation, what do you want to call them? The Gen, I guess is it Gen Z now? The alphas, the alpha generation, okay? That gives me joy because it lets me know that even if we're not able to see the transformation and the change that we want to see, maybe it's going to come when this alpha generation comes up and they become adults themselves. So that's where I find joy in being in community with people who truly believe in the work and still believe that there is a possibility for change and there's a possibility for liberation and resistance against the negative forces that are being imposed upon us.
They're alphas, alpha generation. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that. But I do think into identity affirming education to the next level, then join the forum, the new and exclusive membership space for the Identity Talk community. With membership tiers starting at $3 a month, you'll get early access to podcast episodes, bonus content, our Qualms Quotes monthly newsletter, and monthly live Q&A sessions. You'll also unlock discounts on workshops and products, engage in community discussions, access exclusive community and networking opportunities, and even business ad roles during episodes if you're a sponsor level member. Whether you're an ally, advocate, co conspirator, accomplice, or sponsor, there's a place for you in the forum. So head over to identitytalk4educators.com /pricing plans /list and join the movement today.
That makes me think about how and I'm testing this thought out as we're talking about how they don't know any time before this, and so if we approach them with feelings of dread or burden or hopelessness, then why shouldn't they absorb that? Why shouldn't they? They don't know a time before, and so we want them, or I want them to approach the era they're in with the most confidence and the strongest belief in their ability to affect change, which is one of the hallmarks of the alpha generation, is that they are, among the many things we know about them, one of them is they believe they can affect change, and how we can easily take that from them, or try to take it, or we can dim it, I should say. I don't want to believe that I can take it from them, but we can definitely approach it in a way that feels to them like, why should they be hopeful?
The more we provide models for the younger generation, the more they'll continue to believe, the more that momentum will continue to build over time. So we have to continue to do what we can in the space. And even though it's easier said than done, just the fact that it can be done is enough for us to keep on pushing. Because in the end, my ancestors had to endure so much more than what I'm enduring right now. And they lost their lives as a result of that. So if they were able to withstand Jim Crow, if they're able to withstand being beaten to oblivion every time they step foot in the wrong neighborhood, every time they open up their mouth, every time they persisted, then I think I can do a little bit more to keep that legacy going. That's a responsibility that I have to hold very seriously, as well as others.
That makes a lot of sense. As much as it does, as it can to me as a white person. I'm also thinking about for white people who have not had to do any of that, it that maybe this is a time when we look at how we stand in resistance and how we stand in our strength so that future generations can feel similarly, not the same because we've had very different experiences generationally and racially, of course. But, we haven't, those are muscles that we haven't had to build. And so now is the time to ask ourselves, are you going to intentionally build and develop and maintain those muscles or not? And that's a question that has to be asked daily. It's a question I have to ask myself daily because it's really easy to say, oh, it's hard. So, or I'll leave that to somebody else.
Hmm. Well, you know what? One person who I believe does a great job is this influencer. His name is Jolly Good Ginger. I don't know if you're familiar with Jolly.
Just a little bit, but now I'm writing it down to make sure I become more familiar.
This is a white man. He is an army veteran, so he served our country, and he came from a home where, his family, was very racist. Um, and he inherited some of those traits, but then over time he realized, nah, this is wrong, and denounced some of the things that he grew up experiencing and being conditioned to believe. And now you see him talking to all the elected officials. He is an agitator. He is a reporter, and this is a gentleman who has served our country, is as patriotic as they come, and he is showing up every time, not just with his words, but he's going to DC. He is at the conventions. He was just at the the sit-in that just happened a couple days ago with minority leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senator Cory Booker. He was sitting with them, interviewing them, having conversations. So when we talk about somebody who shows up, he's a really great example of what that can look like. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do exactly what Jolly does. There are other ways he can be involved, but I think the one thing that I could say about him is that he finds different ways to keep on showing up. It's not just as simple as let me read the books, let me watch the documentaries, let me listen to the podcast and these subject matter experts. It's about how can I find different ways to make this content, make this knowledge actionable in my context, being a white person. And he's figured out a way to do that. So I think if you are a white person who's listening to this, we're at a place now where we got to be a bit more braver than we've been. At one time, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, it was enough to just read the books and watch the documentary and have rich intellectual dialogue about it. That was enough. That was acceptable at one time. Now, that's the floor. It's the floor right now. Everything that you need to see to give you a reason to do more is right in front of your face. All you got to do is read Project 2025. And that alone should be enough for you to say, okay, I got to do a little bit more. I got to put a fire under the behinds of my elected officials in my county, in my state, in my neighborhood. I got to be more active in our community and get to know the policies and the different legislation that's out there that's impacting the quality of our lives. I now have a responsibility to do that because of what's happening. See, so many people look at what's happening at the federal level, but we always overlook the fact that so much of what's happening federally starts at the state level and the county level. So those biannual elections that take place, you should be voting every single 2 years for your mayor, your city council, your representatives, state senators. You have to be involved in that because they, more than anybody, play the biggest role in what's happening in DC. So that's what I would say is just figuring out how can you show up within your capacity as a white person that goes beyond just being a learner.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciate about Jolly Good Ginger is that he also accesses his privileges to be in spaces. So he accesses his military history, his gender identity as a man, he accesses his racial identity as a white person to be in spaces. And that's something that I know an ongoing part of my work is how to is and not a question for you to have to address so much as like just posing it as a question, though I'd love to hear your thoughts if you want to. For white people, especially for all people, and especially white people, of how do we dismantle what many of us have been taught, which is if you admit that you have bias or privilege, that you're also saying you're racist and homophobic and all the ist and obias out there, instead of just understanding you have a brain, therefore you have bias. You have identifiers, therefore you have a relationship with privilege. And the sooner we look at the privileges we hold to get us into spaces, which is one of the things he does regularly. And he has a bit of a Southern accent. And so that's, I'm from Tennessee, and that can both be a barrier and an access point. And he seems to use it in different spaces he's in. So just really thinking about all those things. And then when you mention all the layers of government, most of my work is student facing. And what I heard from students over and over again, and I, over the last year, spent so much time talking to educators about, was that what we were saying to students was the whole world's going to be great or terrible. This is the last 3 election cycles, depending on one person in the White House, and forgetting that there are tens of thousands of people between a student and the White House who are in elected and appointed positions of power that they can access just walking down from wherever they live to whatever gathering spot there is of these folks. And I think um, it's unempowering to them to act like it's all on who's sitting in the White House, though that person has immense privilege and we need to pay attention to that all the time. Yet I think if we're looking for places of joy, we should be encouraging them to be at those meetings. They can be at those meetings. They can be in those meetings. They can talk in those meetings. And Jolly Good Ginger does that. You see him showing up in local meetings as well as on the steps of the Capitol.
He's everywhere, everywhere.
Yeah. And he's one person. Imagine if we had, so many people, all the people listening to this, if we showed up in one of those spaces, one, what impact, like if we all decided in the next week, I'm going to show up in one of those spaces where people who have positional privilege, meaning they're in a role or they hold the identifiers, are making decisions in public spaces. And if we all decide to show up in one of those spaces, it's a small thing, but it's a big thing. Sorry, that was a 101. I mean, a soapbox for me.
And I think in the end, as I mentioned, we all have to find what our activism looks like. So for Jolly, being a political commentator and being someone who is a community activist who shows up for different marginalized communities, that's his form of activism. And he does it through social media. He does it exceptionally well. I always love watching his videos and hearing them. But then for myself, I believe that my form of activism has been teaching. Teaching and podcasting has been my form of activism because I am providing a space for individuals to share their deepest truths, but also to be comfortable enough to share what's going on in their communities, right? to be vulnerable, to vent, to even cry. And I think I look at myself, I'm not going to say I'm a healer, but I do provide a space where healing is possible because people are able to unpack their trauma in ways that they're not able to within their school community or even within their homes. That space is not available for them. That space is not accessible. But when you are speaking with, let's be honest, in most cases, a stranger who they've never met before, but this stranger's made them comfortable enough to open up and really just pour their hearts out, I believe that's my way of playing my part in the greater movement, tapping into my experience being an educator, being a consultant, being somebody who is a father, who is a husband, just tapping into my own life experiences and using what I know of those experiences to create learning opportunities and spaces for people to engage in dialogue and also to really think through about what solutions can be available for what's happening. So I just think in the end, we got to take time to figure out what that looks like for each of us. And when we all come together with our talents and competencies and skill sets and talents, we can do something that's amazing.
I'd love to hear more about how you view your work as an educator as a form of activism. And I'm sitting that question, placing that question right next to what I hear from a lot of teachers is I'm so afraid of making a mistake that I don't engage. Um, which is one of the things that you hear from the adults, and the student experience of them not engaging is they don't care or they agree with what's just been said, some harmful thing. And I'm also sitting it next to the question that a lot of educators have around, my school says I can't have these conversations. And so I'm curious, if you were full-time in a classroom now, I know you teach all the time, but if you're full-time in a classroom now, how might you talk about that with your colleagues who are coming to you either directly or indirectly saying, I'm so afraid of messing up, or I'm so afraid of, being told I can't say things, to view their work in the classroom as a form of activism?
I think for one, it'll be finding a place outside of school to hold those conversations. So it might be, going to a cafe or somewhere where we could just sit and chat and really have the space and the comfort to unpack what's happening in our school. So there's that part. But also, even when I was a teacher, anybody could come into my room. Principals could come in, administrators, colleagues can come in. If they ever wanted to just sit down and just chat, they could always come in and chat in my room regarding that. But I just feel like in the situation like this, where education is going to be a necessity for many folks who just do not know the complexities and the nuances of what's happening, there has to be a space where people feel okay with saying what's on their mind and not being afraid to make a mistake, because are when you're hesitant and you're afraid to say the wrong thing or engage in this action, that's a deterrent. That's a deterrent to the work that we need to do, and that's going to impede the progress that we need to make towards liberation and justice. So, yes, you want to learn? I am all for educating and giving you all the information you need so that you can make an informed decision on how to engage. And that's the main reason why I wrote Learn to Relearn, because so often people talk about they say, well, I don't really know. I don't understand. Where can I go to understand? So in the book, as you know, Jen, you got a copy. There's, I mean, there's documentaries, there's websites, there's other books you can read, podcast interviews that I've done with different subject matter experts. So all that body of information that you need to know, the context, the history, it's all there. It's front loaded. Now that you know the context, now you can connect what's happening now to what's happened historically and make a decision on how you can engage in your community. There's no more, I had no idea this was happening. There's no more, I'm shocked that this is the case. I'm shocked by the lack of regard for different communities and different individuals. You've been given the answers to the test. They've actually been there for years. You're just now getting around to paying attention to them. So we have to make sure that we are taking heed to what's available and finding ways to see how that connects to what's happening around me. And by doing that, we'll be able to ask the right questions and take the proper course of action towards addressing what's going on around us.
And that goes back to what you said before of how you can't unknow anymore, and you can't reading a book is not enough anymore. And one of the things I love about your book, as I alluded to before, is that it is one that gives you the facts and inspires you to do something about it at the same time. Because and I don't believe in speaking for other people, but a common experience that white people have is that we want folks of color to educate and validate us. And that's something I work against all the time. We feel like if we're collectively, that if we don't have folks of color doing that, then we don't have to be in the conversation. And I appreciate that you say here are spaces that you can access someone who's a subject matter expert and also has experiences and expertise that you can engage in this way to have the how to or the what to conversation, because that's not true of everybody. And that's part of where, and I don't want people to assume that, I don't want listeners to assume that that's the case with everyone. Plus, we also can't assume that everyone has the same level of knowledge and expertise that you do. So you're saying, here, come here, have this conversation, and then go do, which is really different than a few years ago where it was like everyone needs to join a book club. And that was that was the extent of it.
And I'm not shy about saying that I don't have all the answers. Even after writing a book like that, I don't have all the answers. That's my current knowledge of what's happening right now. But in order for me to get that knowledge, I had to do the research. I had to talk to the right people. I had to lean on other people in order to build my capacity so that I could be in a position to help build the capacity of others. So that's what it comes down to. Are there still certain gaps that I have in my understanding? Absolutely. And I'm still working diligently to close those gaps by engaging in the same actions that I did during the process of writing the book. I'm having the interviews, I'm having these conversations, I'm being in community spaces where these conversations are happening and people are coming up with solutions to address the issues. That's how you build capacity, but also taking the time to reflect by yourself and be honest about your current understanding of what's happening and take it upon yourself to take the necessary steps to close the gaps of knowledge that you may have in whatever area.
Hi friends, it's me, Thaddeus from Thaddeus Nature Notebook. Are you loving our journey into the wild and learning all about awesome animals? Then don't forget to subscribe. You can find Thaddeus Nature Notebook on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Just hit that subscribe button and never miss a new episode. And if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment about your favorite animal. Thanks for listening and exploring nature with me. Let's keep discovering together. Now back to my daddy's cell.
Thank you. And that leads me to another thought around allyship. And we've spoken before, and one of the things you've shared with me that I've thought about so many times is how, when we think about our identifiers, and if we hold majority identifiers, racially, gender, sexual orientation, and more, how can we use those actively to be engaged and also shields? And that's something you said to me months ago, and I still think about it. I still think regularly about how can I use my identifier, access my identifiers to be part of change agency and a shield. And I'd love to hear more about that. And then later, it's a really tricky balance because we don't want to fall into saviorism either. And which I definitely want to unpack. But can you tell us more about what you mean about accessing some of our identifiers to be shields in this work?
I think for with that, in order for you to access your identifiers, you have to have an understanding of what your identifiers mean to other people. You have to understand how other people perceive you based on the identifiers you possess. So in the book, chapter 6, which I know you're familiar with, I talk about the three P's of intersectional identity awareness. I talk about privilege, power, and positionality. If you're able to understand your identifiers in relation to those three things, you'll be able to know how to center yourself in certain situations, but also you'll know times when you'll need to decenter yourself from different settings. So if I'm using myself as an example, even though I grew up as a black boy in the United States and I dealt with racism and colorism and even ableism because I am neurodiverse, right? Once I moved abroad, some of those things change. I was no longer in the I was in a different class. I was viewed differently. I was viewed as somebody who had all the riches and wealth in the world because of the fact that I do come from the United States. Because of the fact that my family is attached to the US government, which holds a lot of power throughout the entire globe. Because of the fact that I have a US passport, because of the fact that I'm able to speak fluent English and I'm college educated with my degrees. All those things hold privilege and power, which then leads to you having a higher level of positionality in different settings. So, here being in Zambia, people look at you and they think that money's just falling out of your pockets every day, right? So, they're trying to find ways to access it. There's also the fact that because I taught in the States and I trained to be a teacher in the States, you're in a position to support schools that didn't have access to that same type of teacher training. So the stuff that we take at face value, the stuff that we look at as teaching 101, right? The basics, that's seen as being super transformational or groundbreaking when we look at it as, well, this is something that we've been doing for generations. There's nothing really special about it. So I think in order for you to access your identifiers and those markers, you have to know what the biases are. You have to have an understanding of why you believe certain things that you believe. Is it because of the environment that you grew up in? Is it because of the messaging that you have receive from family members or people within your neighborhood or community? Is it because of the type of schooling you received in your institution, whether it's at the elementary, middle, high school, or even the higher ed level? What's informing your mindset? What are the different experiences that you've had throughout your life that have led you to see the world the way you see it? You have to take all that into account in order for you to be in a position where you fully understand what those identifiers mean, not just to you, but to others who are around you. Because you may have a story about yourself based on those identifiers, but you also have to understand that people around you have a story about who you are, and they've never even taken the time to get to know you. So, looking at it from those two perspectives.
And then it's taking what you know and thinking about how I can access those to affect change or to hold space for conversations. And um, I have a calculus that I use just for my own experiences. Any identifier I hold that I don't have to navigate around during the day, so I don't have to think ahead. How am I going to physically navigate a space? How am I going to, be able to buy the ticket that I need to buy, or whatever it is? Any identifier I hold that I don't have to navigate around during the day is one that I should assume I have privilege for. And as you said, that changes geographically. I mean, geographics are a huge part of our identifiers and our experiences and our vernacular, our accents, and more. Um, and so, any of those that we hold, then they become something that you can access to affect change. And so, as an example, it's really importantly about what do you have to navigate around. I think about my race as often as I can. I'm not going to say all the time because sometimes I don't. And that's part of the privilege I have, is not having to do that all the time. So I think about my race a lot, but I don't have to navigate around it. As a woman, especially a woman in my mid 50s, I do have to think about, I travel by myself a lot. So I have to work around that. So then I can access my racial privilege to be in conversations. Um, and it's just, so we first think about our identifiers and how they're perceived by others. And then how do you have suggestions for how folks might, after they've done that thinking, which is an ongoing thing, but let's say it's a day and you're thinking about it today, how might they access some of those identifiers to be shields for some of the resistance?
I think for one, you have to assess what the issues are within your community. But in order for you to know those issues are, you got to be in spaces where the folks who have those issues are. So you got to go to the sources, right? Um, and sometimes they could be at city hall meetings. Sometimes they could be at school board meetings. These individuals who are experiencing the issues that you may not be experiencing, they're in those spaces. Sometimes they're the loudest complainers because they've been dealing with the injustices for so long and they're not seeing the changes that have been promised to them. So you have to do an audit of where you are, whether it's your workplace, whether it's your own home, or even your neighborhood, and then ask the questions. You have to be inquisitive, right? Ask the questions. Why do we have this law? Why are there so many businesses causing so many black and brown people to have to be driven out their homes? Why is it that we don't vote for certain elected officials, but we always vote for these other officials every single year, knowing that they're not going to do what they say they're going to do? Why is it that people don't even bother to vote in biannual and also your federal elections for president? Why don't people vote or don't believe that voting is something that is necessary for them to do?
Yeah. And that's in a whole other episode, we could unpack how saviorism and what that is. It is just a moment on it. It is saviorism is super seductive. The energy we get in our brains from feeling like we're fixing things or we're taking care of things is powerful. Um, and saviorism being talking for, doing for other people when we haven't checked in. Do you want this support? And so I think of allyship is, you said the bottom with reading books. Allyship to me is the bottom. It's, I care about you. I have empathy and love for you and your identifiers, and it's a next level. And so just encouraging folks to watch out for the seduction of saviorism by simply checking in. Is this what's needed? Should I show up in this space? Encouraging people to say, hey, this is a space I don't need you in, or I need you here, but I need you over in this part of it, and let me be in this space, and just having those conversations. Um, so last question is, because it's already 50 minutes in and I feel like we've just started, so I hope we'll do a part two. The last question is, when you in in the platform you are in, you hear from so many educators, and I'm wondering, what are your hopes for them, for a next brave step they could each take? What would be something, if you could whisper in their ears about one thing? What are your hopes for teachers? And actually, I shouldn't say teachers. I believe everyone who works in a school is an educator. Some are classroom educators, and some are, hallways, business office educators. But for the educators of the world, what would be your hopes?
I would just say stay the course. Stay the course. Now, we understand that there may be times where you just have to step away. There may be situations where being a teacher in the classroom may not be the best way to make a contribution because you have to prioritize your mental health. But you can still stay the course and support young people in a totally different way. Sometimes even more than you would if you were still in the classroom. So I would say stay the course. I would also say that we need to listen to our young people, listen to your students. Don't get caught up in the delivery of what they say, but rather the message that they're communicating to you. Because we have to understand, depending on the age levels that we're dealing with. So in my case, I taught middle school students. So I was around students ranging from ages 12 to 15 years old. They don't always have the right words to articulate how they're feeling and what's happening to them. Sometimes their silence is a form of communication. So when you notice that someone is being very silent, too silent, you got to tap into that. You want to know why. Because there may be something going on outside of school that you just may need to investigate further, right? So listen to your students, stay the course, and when all else fails, find joy. When all else fails, find joy.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Kwame, I am so grateful for to be in a space with you, to be doing this work, and for your friendship and how you always give me so much to think about. I just really appreciate you, and I know listeners will as well. This is a part of Third Space where I always ask guests to share one thing you hope listeners will take away, and it could be something you've already said, or something else. And also, if you want them to contact you, how might they do so? And we'll put everything in the session notes as well.
All right. And folks, just to let you know, this episode of Third Space is also going to be on the Identity Talk for Educators Live podcast. So this is a crossover episode. So for those that listen to Identity Talk for Educators Live, this will be a future episode that's going to come out in the next few weeks. So be on the lookout for that. As far as how you can get a hold of me, the best place to go is to my website, which is identity talk 4 numeral 4 educators.com. Over there, you'll learn more about my professional development services and consulting services through Identity Talk. You'll also find information about the podcast, and you'll just learn a lot more about the work that I do as an educator. So identitytalk4educators.com is where to go. And I look forward to connecting with people.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kwame. Everything will be in the notes, so you can click on those. Please, please, please follow his work. Amplify the book. It's something that I think everybody should have. It's, mine is dog-eared too. Yours looks like it's been in a backpack. Some mine has as well. I brought it to several schools and said, just brought it out west recently. Along with our friend Liza Toulousen's book and the marriage. Somebody said to me, and I was so flattered that their school, the summer reading is your book, my book, and Liza's book, and or it's on the list of options. Along with some podcasts and everything, and so I'll put you in touch with them. But I was like, wow, to be in that space, what a compliment. So you've been listening to Third Space. To find out more about my work, please go to my website at www.jencort, that's CORT.com. Please like, rate, subscribe, and review Third Space. We are a zero budget podcast, and the only way we get in people's feed is by your sharing the experiences you've had in Third Space.